Hello, Magic players and collectors. Welcome to the Land Library. I'm your librarian, and in this episode of Legendary Locations, we're discussing Boseiju. I'm actually going over the Jukai Forest as a whole, but Boseiju is a lot more recognizable than the Forest of Jukai. So, for the sake of the recognizability, it's just the Boseiju episode. So the Forest of Jukai actually contains three legendary lands: Boseiju who shelters all, Boseiju who endures, and Okina Temple to the Grandfathers, along with a myriad of other related cards. But starting with the Boseiju cards, we have the older of the two, Boseiju who shelters all. This is from Champions of Kamigawa, and this version of Boseiju comes in tapped, and it taps for a single colorless mana, but with an additional cost of paying 2 life while tapping. As an additional effect, if that mana is spent on an instant or sorcery, that spell can't be countered. This card has received two special arts, one in Secret Lair and another in the Tales of Middle-earth Commander, where it gets a reskin as Isengard, Saruman's Fortress. Next up, we've got Boseiju Who Endures. This is a much newer card, having come out in Kamigawa Neon Destiny, and at the time of making this video, is a current standard meta staple. This one comes in untapped, can tap for a green, and has a channel ability. The channel ability costs a green and a generic, although you can get rid of the generic if you have a legendary creature, so it will only cost a green. And then it targets an enchantment, artifact, or non-basic land an opponent controls and destroys it, and destroys itself. Then, the player whose card was targeted and destroyed gets to search their deck for a land with a basic land type and put it in play. This Boseiju also has a couple of special arts. It has an extended art version and a secret layer art. And the final legendary land is Okina Temple to the Grandfathers. This one also came out with the original Boseiju in Champions of Kamigawa, and this one comes in untapped, can tap for a green, as well as give a legendary creature a 1/1 until end of turn at the cost of green and tapping. Unlike the Boseiju cards, Okina only has the one art. And then we have all of the other related cards. These are mostly creatures and or people that are from the forest, and I won't go into details for all of these, but if you really want to know what they do, just go ahead and pause. All of them will be on screen as I'm going through them. So these include Boon of Boseiju, Okina Nightwatch, Ayumi the Last Visitor, Azusa Lost but Seeking, Body of Jukai, Elder Pine of Jukai, Favor of Jukai, Jukai Messenger, Jukai Naturalist, Jukai Preserver, Jukai Trainee, Roar of Jukai, Shigeki Jukai Visionary, Greater Tanuki, Invoke the Ancients, Jugon the Rising Star, Jugon Defends the Temple, Kura the Boundless Sky, Dozan the Fallen Leaf, and Dozan's Oldest Chant. It's a total of 23 cards for the Forest of Jukai. The Plain of Kamigawa has quite a bit of lore, and I will be referencing a few things that I'm not going to go really in depth on because I don't want to go on a ton of side tangents. So if you really want to know all of the Kamigawa lore, you're probably just going to have to look it up and not just watch this video, because I'm really just trying to cover the Jukai part. But with that out of the way, the Forest of Jukai is an ancient cedar forest in the plain of Kamigawa, once one of the largest regions in the plain, being close to the size of all of the surrounding regions combined. Originally, the forest was shared by the Kami, Orochi, and human monks. Although these groups had little to no interaction with each other, they kinda just all existed in the forest. Throughout time, though, the forest has shrunk in size, starting with the Soratami invasion, when an unknown amount of the forest was destroyed. I couldn't find any specific numbers, just that some of it was destroyed. Later, in 3207 AR, when the Kami War broke out, even more of the forest was lost to the war. The kami of the forest had become violent and started to attack the peoples within the forest. Many of the monks refused to even try to fight the kami, and either fled or just died to the attacks. Only a few of the most dedicated stayed behind to protect Okina, which was the oldest and most revered temple in all of Kamigawa. It's set near the foot of Boseiju and is considered the very heart of the plain itself. These monks, led by Dosan, tried to advocate for peace between the Kami and mortals. despite the kami's hatred literally withering Dosan's body as he continued to pray to them. But with the help of Jugan, the spirit protector of the forest, who was a dragon, Ohina was kept safe throughout the war. 20 years after the Kami War started, it ended and peace was restored. But trouble was still kind of brewing, because after a while the city Towashi, in its exponential growth, started to encroach into the forest. The trees were being cut down to make way for new buildings, and the lumber was used to make the new buildings, and the Kami were being driven out, which was causing tensions to rise once again. The Kami started attacking builders and destroying buildings, and the builders, of course, started retaliating. The tension becoming so high that the Emperor, fearing another great war, had to sign a peace treaty with the Kami. This treaty would have the people of Tawashi no longer cutting down any more of the forest, and in exchange, the Kami would just let them keep all of the land they had already cleared unopposed. However, there was one exception. The Seiju had been absorbed into the city by now, and they were not allowed to cut down Boseiju. Boseiju was the very embodiment of the soul of the forest, and at this point was well over 3,000 years old. The forest was then completely closed off to all mortals, and with the city unable to expand its borders any further, they started to build upwards, making taller and taller buildings. But something interesting happened. The Seiju, who had been the same size for many years, started growing again, not wanting to be outdone by the city. It grew taller than their buildings, and so the builders made even taller buildings, and Boseiju grew even taller still. The Seiju wanted to send a message to the people of Tawashi to remind them of who was there first. They may have the land, but they don't truly own it. Eventually, the boom of technology led to the creation of the Order of Jukai, a group that was weary of the unlimited use of technology, thinking it would irreparably damage the fabric of reality itself. The Order of Jukai wanted to preserve nature and valued the spirits of the world, even building new temples to make the kami feel welcome in Tawashi. This led to homes being built on Boseiju, and the aptly named Boseiju district was made for those who wanted to embrace nature and have an escape from the modern life of the city. But everything came crashing down in 4562 AR when the Phyrexian invasion of the multiverse hit Kamigawa. Tawashi was overwhelmed by the Phyrexians, and Boseiju itself was completed by the Phyrexians, a process which broke her and split her apart. It's unclear what happened after that, though. There's not any precedent of a non-person to be completed, and although glistening oil was used, so presumably Boseiju went through Phyrexis, I can't really find any details about what specifically happened. Typically, the completion process involves like surgeries and implants, sometimes even killing the person, but reanimating them with necromancy, all of which will remove the soul. But Boseiju is a tree, not a person. So this is just pure speculation, but I think due to the non-traditional completion of a tree and her ability for seemingly unlimited growth, Boseiju could possibly uncomplete herself by just regrowing to replace all that was corrupted. I don't think Boseiju has like a soul that could have been removed, or personality to be like changed, or even like a mind to be mind controlled. So there isn't really anything stopping her from just continuing to be the spirit of the forest and not being loyal to the Phyrexians. But, like I said, that's just complete speculation. There's not really any further information about Boseiju, Okina, or the Jukai Forest after the Phyrexian invasion, so that's just where it is for now. Both Boseiju cards are pretty good, but one is definitely better. I've started with Boseiju Who Shelters All in the other parts of this video, so we're just going to keep that going. Boseiju Who Shelters All is definitely the weaker of the two. Its ability to make spells uncounterable is great, but it has its drawbacks. First off, it only works for spells, so all permanents don't get any of that protection. And secondly, it only makes colorless mana. There are plenty of spells that do have a generic or colorless mana cost, but this ability is completely locked away for all spells that have colored mana costs, exclusively colored mana costs, which can really limit your options for available targets for this effect. So while this isn't viable in every deck, because that ability just can't go in everything, it does have a really good niche you can build around it, and it does see quite a bit of play in both Modern and Legacy. Boseiju Who Endures, however, is an absolute powerhouse. This land instantly became a meta staple and has stayed meta relevant since, and presumably will only leave the meta when it is forced to by being rotated out. It makes a green colored mana, which is always better than making colorless, but its real power comes from its channel ability. The ability to target so many different permanents and destroy something is so powerful, especially considering that the channel cost is so cheap. With a total cost of only 2, which can very easily be reduced to a single green, especially in Commander when a legendary creature is almost guaranteed. The secondary effect of the target opponent getting to replace their destroyed card with a basic land type, which to be honest is probably just going to be a basic land, is so weak and is technically optional, so it barely even matters. In Standard, when you can run multiple copies, it's not even much of a drawback that it destroys itself because you can just replace it. And in Commander, you can get around that drawback when you pair it with cards like Conduit of Worlds that can get it back out of your graveyard. And lastly, we have Okina Temple to the Grandfathers. This is an okay card. It makes colored mana, so that's always a good start, but its other ability is very weak. Adding a temporary 1/1 with only legendary creatures as its targets is meh. There's nothing wrong with it, but the limited targets and very small and temporary boost just isn't useful in most situations. It does get slightly better in Commander, where of course you have your Commander as an almost guaranteed viable target, so it won't hurt to run it in Commander, just in case, but outside of Commander, you're trading off having, a Forest, which is far more searchable and has more interactions for a potential 1/1 temporary boost, which in my opinion is just not worth it. Since there's 3 legendary lands in this episode, I get to add all 3 to this tier list. And they all basically share the same lore, so their tiers are more about the usefulness of the cards rather than kind of their overall vibe like I did for Three Tree City. So first off, we've got Boseiju Who Shelters All. This is a B tier. Making spells uncounterable is pretty good, but it's just too restricted to be great. It's a nice niche option, but that's kind of it. Second, Boseiju Who Endures, easy S tier. This is a meta level powerhouse. It's seen tons of tournaments. It has powerful targeted destruction for really cheap, and can still be a decent source of mana if you want it to be. And lastly, Okina Temple to the Grandfathers is unfortunately a D tier. It's definitely a playable card, but its underwhelming ability just begs the question of why was it even put on a legendary to begin with? If you've made it this far in the video, might as well drop a like for turn and subscribe for more land-filled content. If I missed anything, got anything wrong, or if you just have questions, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next legendary locations with Care Keep.